Good afternoon. I'm Nolan. This is Neel, Suraj, Rusit, and Juan, and we're doing Tupac Shakur, his impact. So just to start off a little bit about Tupac. So he was born in 1971 as Hussein Parrish Crooks. His name was later changed to Tupac Amaru Shakur because he was named after a Peruvian revolutionary. He then died in 1996 in a drive-by shooting. It's important to remember that Tupac was only 25 years old when he died. So in just 25 years of life, he was able to make a major impact on society. He was also, from a young age, he had people influencing him. His mother was a member of the Black Panthers, so he already saw how people could impact the world by counteracting racism. Our thesis is Tupac Shakur incorporated experiences of police brutality and injustice into his work in order to reveal these issues to the African American community and inspire them to take action and bring about change.
So Tupac would not be Tupac without his mentors. So as Nolan was talking about, his mom was Jenny Shakur, and she was a member of the Black Panther Party. And this organization made it a goal, after witnessing countless acts of police brutalism, to bring a voice to those that were disenfranchised and underprivileged. Due to his mother's involvement with the party, Tupac attended numerous rallies and was exposed to the ideologies of the Black Panther Party. His next mentor was Mutulu Shakur, and this was his stepfather. He was part of the Revolutionary Action Movement, which advocated black nationalism and self-defense against white terrorist groups. Though he left the family when Tupac was just 11 and was soon jailed after, Tupac maintained contact with him throughout his incarceration and often turned to him for advice. One of his other major mentors was Elmer Geronimo Pratt. This was Tupac's godfather, and he was also involved with the Black Panther Party as the Minister of Defense of the Los Angeles chapter. So this was just another way that Tupac was exposed to the Black Panther Party. But in addition to this, Tupac saw secondhand the injustice within the police system, as Geronimo Pratt was jailed for 27 years for a crime that he did not commit. So surrounded by influences like these, Tupac was immersed in the ideas of black nationalism and experienced first and secondhand the injustices of the police system.
Tupac Shakur's first artistic experience was in poetry. So most of his poems are in the book The Rose That Grew from Concrete, and there are some common themes that we see in this book. So first of all, he focuses on worldwide justice as opposed to just justice for African Americans. And then also he talks about other people's experiences instead of just his own. This may be because he wrote these poems when he was between the ages of 17 and 19, so he didn't have very many experiences in the world where he could relate his own experiences to how other people see him and the racial injustice in the world. So he focused on other people's experiences. The first poem is How Can We Be Free? And in this poem, he references a couple different people. So first you have George Jackson. So he was sentenced to 1 year to life in prison for stealing $70 from a gas station. He ended up spending the rest of his life in prison. And obviously, you should not go to jail for the rest of your life for just stealing $70. But the important thing here is that George Jackson counteracted this injustice put upon him and later organized protests among prisoners when he saw that the white guards were brutalizing the other African American prisoners. And then he also wrote letters explaining what was happening on the inside of his prison. And then another example of someone who has fought back after injustice is Huey Newton, which he references next. And he was the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. And then lastly, there's Geronimo Pratt, who Neel just talked about, and he was wrongly sentenced to life for murder, and then he was released after 27 years in prison. And the important thing to recognize here is Shakur explains how these people had injustices brought upon them, and then they fought back. And that is what he wants to inspire other people to do, is to fight back after they see these injustices. So the next poem is Liberty Needs Glasses. So in this poem, he first references, again, Mutulu Shakur and Geronimo Pratt. So they were both victims of COINTELPRO, which is an illegal FBI program that basically targeted radical groups and tried to send them to prison. And they succeeded with both of these people. And Geronimo Pratt, the evidence that was withheld that caused him to be sentenced to life in prison was a product of this COINTELPRO program. And then he contrasts the way that African Americans are treated with the way white people are treated with Oliver North, who was involved in the Iran-Contra scandal. And he was then later pardoned and didn't really have any punishment for his actions. And then he also talks about Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan was influential in the war on drugs, and the war on drugs is known to be one of the reasons that the African Americans face the police brutality that we see today. And overall, you can see that there's the contrast between the two. And again, the people that have had these injustices brought upon them are fighting back like Tupac wants his readers to. And in this picture here, you can see the difference between Tupac Shakur, who's still in prison today, and Oliver North, who is free even though he committed crimes himself.
Shakur has had multiple instances of police brutality and injustice in his works of rap. His lyrics explain either experiences or generalizations of the police force that he noticed during his time, and he incorporates these in order to reveal the issues that African Americans face but may not be aware of. And as seen in many of his rap songs, including Trapped, Violent, and the others listed. And today we'll be examining the two songs that are played before the presentation, Trapped and Violent. Now in this first part of Trapped, Shakur is referring to himself and talking about how because of his skin color, he cannot walk through his city without being bothered by a police officer. Furthermore, he shows how police officers are brutal and unjust with African Americans through the lyric, hands up, throw me up against the wall, didn't do a thing at all. And so he is essentially trapped in the system with no escape from this injustice. And in this next part from Trapped, police officers have been killing innocent people without consequences. Simply seeing a black person, they assume they have found the suspect that they're after, and they killed the suspect regardless of whether or not they were the actual culprit. And this is shown by the lyric, coppers tried to kill me, but they didn't know this was the wrong street. Bang, bang, down another casualty. And so even though they have killed an innocent person, they face no consequences as seen with the lyrics. Who do you blame? It's a shame because the man's slain. And now transitioning to Violent. This portion of the lyrics shows Shakur's generalizations that police officers believe themselves to be superior to African Americans and believe they can treat them however they please. And this is shown with the lyric, he had the nerve to say that I had a curfew. And it's actually a reference to olden times when there were Jim Crow laws, and including one which prohibited African Americans from leaving their homes after 10 p.m. And this part is incorporated into Violent to show the old thought process that the certain corrupt cops had of that time, how that relates to a previous time. In this next part of Violent, police officers are trying to frame Shakur by saying that he was in possession of illegal drugs to have an excuse to arrest him. As shown with the lyric, but I'm a rap fiend, not a crack fiend. And also, in this instance, Shakur's friend is shot even though they were both innocent. And this encourages Shakur to beat the police officer. As shown in the lyric, I heard a bullet fire from the cop's gun, my homie dropped, so I hit the cop. And in this instance, Shakur is actually reversing the roles of the police officer and the African American. In previous experiences that he showed, the police officer is showing brutality against the African American, but in this case, Shakur is reversing that role and showing brutality against the police officer to show that action needs to be taken in order for there to be a change. And in this next part, Shakur says, but I came up to show that he decided to take action against the issue of police brutality. And he did this to, he shows us that for there to be change, action needs to be taken, as like this is his belief. And so with this reversal of roles, even though police officers have commonly showed brutality against African Americans, they are seen as innocent. However, when Shakur reverses these roles and beats up the police officer, he's looked at as an individual, as a dangerous and violent individual, as shown in the lyric, now they claiming that I'm violent. And so police brutality, injustice, violence, and mistreatment. These are the topics and issues that Shakur incorporates into his songs to reveal the issues that are present, to show how they impact African Americans, and why action needs to be taken in order for there to be a change. He emphasizes these issues to stress this need of change. And his message is that something needs to be done in order for these issues to be resolved.
One of the most influential first-hand experiences that Shakur had with police brutality happened very early on in his career, on October 17, 1991 in Oakland, California. Shakur was walking to the bank along the streets when he was stopped by two white police officers who then arrested him for jaywalking. These two white police officers had a history of unnecessary violence and abuse on African American arrests, and Shakur was a little confused and angry as to why they would pick him out and target him for such a petty crime. The officers then asked him for 3 pieces of ID, for which Tupac immediately complied, and once they saw his ID, they immediately harassed him and made jokes and racist remarks about his name. After that, Shakur just asked for his citation so he could move along with his day, but the officers repeatedly refused to give it to him. Shakur kept asking, they kept refusing, and eventually Shakur got angry. That was when the cops grabbed Shakur and choked him and threw him on the ground. There were 2 of the cops, and one of them choked him, while the other one slammed his face repeatedly into the pavement. This occurred until Shakur lost consciousness, and they kept beating him senseless. It is noted that Shakur never assaulted or resisted against the cops during this whole ordeal, and they kept hitting him until he regained consciousness again. They then kicked him back up and made slavery remarks towards him, and referenced themselves as his master. After this incident, Shakur decided to sue the Oakland Police Department for $10 million. His goal in this lawsuit was to use the money from the settlement to build a boys' home and center, which was very incredible at the time, considering this was very early on in Tupac's career, right around the time his debut album was about to come out. So this shows that even though he had very little to no income at the time, he still wanted to use the money for a good purpose, and he did this to inspire others to take action against the oppression they faced from the police and to make the officers face consequences for their actions. The result of this was a $42,000 settlement, which he did use for that. And this was influential at the time because this was in an era before smartphones or any other evidence were there to support a young African-American rapper in a case against 2 white police officers, where the odds were stacked against him. And Shakur also references police brutality in his trap music video, where he references the scene of an African-American being beat up by 2 white police officers. In this picture, you can see Shakur shortly after the incident. It shows the bruises and scrapes on his face from being repeatedly slammed into the pavement. And he suffered emotional and physical pain, mainly on his neck, wrists, and face.
So despite this unpleasant run-in with authority, Shakur acted when he saw 2 white men harassing a black motorist. It seemed as though the old Southern rules were in play, and his years of conditioning demanded that he do something, so he intervened. So it started off with words being exchanged, but then tempers flared up, and eventually shots were fired. And in the end, both white men who ended up being off-duty police officers were injured, and Shakur was arrested on 2 counts of aggravated assault. However, Shakur was released due to the fact that numerous witnesses stated that at the time, both of the officers were in fact the aggressors at all times. And this was really significant to the black community at the time because it showed that a black man could stand up to injustice and bring about change and succeed. So Shakur's influence spread beyond rap and poetry as well. So on a smaller social scale, he spread ideas throughout those around him. So Ray Love, a friend of his, recounted a time in his childhood where Shakur would talk to him and his friends about the importance of political activism and of the Black Panther Party. But also on a larger scale, he influenced organizations such as NAPO, which is the New African Panther Organization, and he created the Thug Life Code. So through NAPO, he organized rallies that advocated against police abuse and for the release of political prisoners. And his Thug Life Code called on gang members to protect the most vulnerable members of society, stating that the boys in blue don't run nothing, we do. So, yeah.
While Tupac Shakur's rhetoric is basically meant to trigger a reaction from the African American community for a lot of the racial injustice that was going on during his time, his message is still relevant to current affairs. Changes is a 1998 posthumous song produced by Shakur's label. That's a great example of basically his ability to highlight racial injustice as the lyrics connect the past and future. The first example is the penitentiary path and it's filled with blacks, but some things will never change. In this line, Shakur basically talks of how minorities are the majority of incarcerated individuals in the prison system in the United States. And this is the same as today, which refers to racial prejudice, which, as mentioned before, has some roots in the war on drugs. Second example is instead of a war on poverty, they got a war drugs so the police can bother me. This refers to the war on drugs, which was initiated actually in the 70s by President Nixon. Its effects are still felt today, as 21% of incarcerated people are there because due to a drug offense. And actually, Nixon's domestic advisor later even admitted that this decision was driven by racism. The police brutality and general racial injustice that Shakur has referenced and seen in his lifetime, this has actually seen increased national attention in the past few years due to the advent of the digital age. Cases such as those of Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, and Michael Brown, etc., these have been thrust in the spotlight more and more. And Shakur's message for basically wanting to galvanize the black community seems to have taken hold as groups, mainly the most prominent one being Black Lives Matter, have finally taken action. And recently, there have been many protests in the past few years. There is a line of thought that refers to Shakur as a prophet of sorts, and this is evidenced by many of his messages that still reverberate and ring true today. And his attempt to trigger the black community, for example, has finally taken the spotlight, even though he rapped about it almost 20 years ago. There's also more evidence of Shakur's increased relevance today. Kendrick Lamar is a modern artist that is closest to Shakur in terms of theme and overall similarity. He actually, one of his most popular albums, To Pimp a Butterfly, was originally called To Pimp a Caterpillar, and if you can see, the acronyms would actually spell out Tupac, so it was basically homage to Tupac. And even though it ended up changing the name, it still basically repeated many of Tupac's messages in this album. Even with increased activism in the past few years or so, the fight against racial injustice and police brutality still persists. Many minorities are still very afraid of police, as a study found in 2015. And examples such as Michael Brown and Tamir Rice, who were mere teenagers, shows that age doesn't matter in cases of police brutality, only the color of their skin. These examples. In the beating of Rodney King, for example, in 2012, a study followed after it showed that there was systemic racial abuse in the police system in the United States.
So, as seen with current events and statistics, Shakur's message remains relevant today. His contributions spread through rap and poetry in the organizations he was part of, bringing awareness to the injustices within the police system. But his impact was not just limited to awareness, but calling others to action.